How's it going, everybody? My name is fallinghurts, and today we're going to be talking about a game I've been playing for a little while now. This is kind of a pseudo review for Kaku, the Ancient Seal, which is a game, I admit, I have not finished it. So say what you will about the necessity of this review if I haven't played the entire experience, but I think I've played enough to tell you if you're going to like it or not, given what you may be expecting going into it. So what is Kaku, the Ancient Seal? Let's just go ahead and read this quick description from the Steam page, and I'll kind of break down how each of these aspects play into the game. It's an open-world action-adventure combining exploration with puzzles and dynamic combat. You're going to go on a journey across a sprawling continent as Kaku, a boy tasked to restore balance to the land. Brave the 4 elemental regions with the help of Piggy, his powerful companion, and conquer their lords. So yeah, the game reads just as expected with a lot of in-between that I guess I can talk about briefly. I don't really want to spend too much time on this review, as I'm not going to go fully in-depth, but I think I'm going to try to highlight exactly what might and might not work for a lot of players. So first off, the combat in this game, you've got like a dodge, a parry, melee, and you do have a ranged slingshot with elemental different pellets as well. And on top of getting different armors that you can wear as well that don't so much have different like stats as far as like, hey, this one defends you more and this one doesn't. They have different characteristics. Now, with each of these, both weapons and your armor, you're going to be able to imbue them with gems, which can impact them in small ways, such as more damage, a certain elemental damage, more health on certain of the armors, and different things like that. And in that way, the game feels really good. I actually really liked the progression of exploration, finding these items around the world in different chests and things like that. And in that way, I think the game works surprisingly really well. And while I'll get to probably my favorite aspect of the game in just a minute, the world itself, while I did like the pacing of, finding these items and doing things like that, one bit where I didn't like the pacing as much were the character upgrade system. And that kind of breaks down in 2 different ways. First off, you've got the, skill points that you can use, and the multiple different ways that you can influence the attributes with skill points works totally fine. But the issue I actually have with it is where it's all located. So Piggy, the character mentioned earlier, is basically like a plot device or like a mechanic device. So this pig can teleport you, and it actually does play into a few different platforming elements in certain parts, but one of its main abilities is actually to teleport you to this other realm, this kind of hub area that is your leveling up and your different attributes and things like that. Now, something you can find throughout the open worlds are seal door keys, which are basically, if I'm thinking Breath of the Wild, the little shrines. But instead of, working your way towards an upgrade with a shrine, once you complete a shrine, you get either, a health or stamina or some kind of upgrade like that. There's parts of the system I like, and there's parts I don't. First off, I like that it's, centralized. I really do. That way you don't have to travel all across the different landscapes to find where you were looking for a shrine that you couldn't complete earlier on. However, my issue with it is, as you're moving throughout the open worlds and you find all of these shrine keys, you can tend to marathon a bunch of these shrines all at once if you prefer to do that. And I can't lie, like, it felt like I had to limit myself. It felt like the pacing was just really weird in that sense, because it felt like I had to do it to upgrade my character, but it felt like very boring in that sense. And that's not to say the quality of the shrines themselves. There's actually a good bit of, both platforming and puzzle elements to these, as well as the occasional combat section. And I think that was when the game felt the most curated, genuinely. The open world is a bit more chaotic and, quite frankly, a bit easy in the general scheme of things. But the shrines themselves actually limit you in such a nice way that it felt like the best aspect of the game, other than the fact of how you're actually interacting with them. So I've talked about the shrines, I've talked a bit about, the character setup, and I could go into the different skill points that you could spend if you want. You get different abilities. There's actually different combos based off of your light or heavier, style attacks. And I think they feel great. I think that each of them plays into combat in a unique way, and depending on the type of enemies you're surrounded by, I think it helps a bunch. Now, one thing I will say, there's 4 major open worlds to this game. I'm not going to show them all because, as I said, I haven't gone through all of them yet. But from the enemies that I've faced, enemy design is actually pretty good. There's some congruency in between the regions that I've played. There's, just different colored variations of what you've already fought, but there's definitely unique things within each of the areas, and in that way I think it's really cool. One thing that is kind of universal are the pon-pons, which are like these tribesmen, which are hostile on sight, but you can actually get quests from them if you disguise yourself as them. So again, think like the Gerudo, I don't know how you pronounce it. Are those the right ones? Where Link turns into a twink in Breath of the Wild. Again, I'm making a lot of comparisons there because I feel like that's the closest thing I can compare this game to. Although with a lot less freedom. You're very much tied to the world in a very grounded way in this, where in Breath of the Wild it felt like anything that you had the tools for at the time you could do. But if you sit down and meet this game at its terms, it's fun enough. But one thing I will say, it doesn't matter how many types of enemies there are or how many different abilities you can use on them, there's just so much within this game that it does start to drag down a bit. It gets a little repetitive. The further into the game you get, the more you play, and you find yourself more and more skipping combat encounters, which in the end does limit you with your skill points. But this game is very much a completionist game. There's like 85 achievements within the game, and so far I've unlocked about half of them. And in that way, as you're ticking off those percents on each of these regions, it's really satisfying. I can't lie to that, and to the people who play open world games to checkbox like that, I think that's the key audience for this game. But now let's talk a bit about the environment, the story, and the presentation, I guess. So let's start with the story. Very simple. There's a rot amongst the land. There's this core area that you're going to be traveling to regain these elemental seals. And of course, in order to do so, you're going to have to fight the elemental bosses of each of the regions to regain control. And in that way, I like it. I mean, it's very simple, but it's the fun little stories in between. Like helping a cook perfect a certain formula of food is just really, really cool. And then come to find out at the end of the story, you have to save him, and that's how it ties into the greater narrative of each region. And in that way, the game is really simple. I don't really think the game has too much to say, if I'm being honest. But every game doesn't need that either. With that being said, I do enjoy the visual presentation. The cutscenes are really funny sometimes, and it's all done without voice acting. So, hit or miss on if you feel like that's necessary here. The characters like Piggy are talking enough that you wish there was sometimes, but overall it's fine. It's not that big of a deal. The music for the game is definitely repetitive, but again, it just comes down to the fact that you're spending so much time throughout each of these environments doing different things. And there is variation to music here and there. It's not like it's just one song throughout. But again, as you're spending a lot of time in certain areas, fighting the same enemies, it does drag. But finally, let's talk about these landscapes. So, I'm probably going to just show the trailer for the game at this point because it's going to give a quick snippet of each of the environments. But I have to say, each of the 4 major biomes is beautiful. I mean, there's just so much to see. There's very minimal pop-in, which is nice. Whether it be the different enemies across the landscape, some of the different flora, fauna, the sand, the water, the lava, anything. It looks great, and of each of the environments, each of the different elemental types, even moving from area to area within it, because there are different stages, it gets more and more varied. There's only 4 biomes technically, but there's a bunch of different types of visuals to see within them. So in that way, it feels even more than meets the eye. So at the end of the day, if this was like an exploration puzzle game with lighter combat, I think this game would be near perfect. But with the checklisty style world, I think it does justify the heavier combat for the game. It just really wasn't gelling with me personally as heavy as I feel like it could for some. However, with the game in early access being $25 US, it is going to go up. It's still going to be a really strong price to time proposition. However, I would maybe play the demo for the game. There is one up on PC. I just don't know how else to say it, but it's kind of a situation where it doesn't feel the strongest as far as gameplay. This isn't something that has a million combos, but it has enough. It doesn't have a million different enemy types, but it has enough. I just feel like the game asks you to 100% it by default, and if you do that and you go in knowing that, I think it's definitely a super fun experience. But if you go in for just the story alone, you might feel a little lackluster. So with that being said, my name is fallinghurts, and to the developers over at Bingo Bell, I like your game well enough. But really, that's it for me. So thank you so much for watching this video if you found it, and I hope you liked the video. If you play the game, I hope you like the game. And that's really it for me. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.